I'm so glad you could come. This is going to be such an exciting day. I hope you enjoy it. I think you will. And now, would you please show me your
House of EdTech, episode 44.
Hello, listeners. I'm Josh Gauthier, and I'm coming to you from De Pere, Wisconsin, and you are listening to the House of EdTech with Mr. Chris Nessie.
This episode of House of EdTech is brought to you in part by todaysmeet.com. Have you considered adding backchanneling to your classroom? Check out todaysmeet.com/houseofedtech to learn more about how you can add Today's Meet's awesome new Teacher Tools feature. You can now access your transcripts forever. You can pause the conversation. You now have a new high level of access control for your Today's Meet chat rooms, and it now offers an awesome, simple way to mute the unruly students. Add backchanneling to your classroom today with Today's Meet. And by HelpHub.me. HelpHub.me is the internet's premier online tutoring marketplace. Share your knowledge with the world, and you can make a little bit of money too. So check out HelpHub.me and start teaching the world. Welcome to the House of EdTech podcast. I am your host, Christopher Nessie, and the House of EdTech explores how technology is changing the way teachers teach and the impact that technology is having in education. My objectives include discussing technology that is changing our classrooms and schools and sharing tools and tips you can hear about today and use tomorrow. I talk to teachers, leaders, and creators like you and have them share their stories. The purpose? Whether you use it or not, technology is changing the way we teach and how our students learn. Welcome back inside the House of EdTech. This episode marks the first episode of my school year here in September 2015. Summer is well into my rearview mirror. The dog days are over, and we are here and ready to go. Welcome back to the regular format of the podcast. Coming up in this episode, I have an EdTech thought, my EdTech recommendation, of course the House of EdTech VIP, and a great conversation that I had with Tony Sinanis and Joe Sanfelippo. Before I get to my conversation with the two doctors who are rocking education to the extreme, first I wanted to find out, did you know that during my school year, on Fridays, I put out a weekly blog post called Mr. Nessie's EdTech Roundup. In these posts, I curate articles that relate to professional and personal development, app and technology recommendations, as well as the most interesting or useful thing that I dub my pick of the week. These blog posts actually predate the podcast, and these EdTech Roundups are kind of the influence into how I created and formatted the podcast to begin with. So that's a little House of EdTech history lesson for you. You can actually subscribe to get these posts and any blog post on the site, chrisnessie.com, and they'll come directly to your inbox. Check out the show notes for this episode with a link so you can get that information today. And I hope you'll subscribe and check out the roundups on a weekly basis on Fridays. What else is going on here is we get back into the swing of things here in September. As I record this on September 12th, and this gets released on September 13th, next week, this Saturday, I'm looking forward to attending and presenting at the NJPAECT2 conference on September 19th and 20th. My friends and I have dubbed this the Alphabet Conference because of all the letters in the acronym for the conference. So we will be at the Alphabet Conference on September 19th and 20th. Now, if you're also going, please let me know. I always love to meet and talk with people who listen to the podcast or are in my PLN. So don't be shy. Come up, say hello, shake my hand. I would love to meet you. At this particular conference, I'll be presenting with Stacy Lindis, who is a former guest of the podcast and a good friend. And we're going to be talking about podcasting and Twitter for professional and personal development. Now, also at this conference, I'm also organizing, the first ever House of EdTech meetup. And that's going to be on Saturday, September 19th. And that's going to take place at a local restaurant near the conference here in New Jersey. If you'd like more information, shoot me a message on Twitter. My username is Mr. Nessie, and I'd love to have you come along and have dinner. that'd be fantastic. I'd also like to share a little bit of Twitter feedback that I got since the last episode. And I'd like to thank Melanie Guildharry, whose Twitter name is, I'm going to spell it out because I really don't know how I should pronounce it. So Melanie's Twitter handle is ChemelNallc. And Melanie said that she enjoys the EdTech thoughts in each episode, and she's been working over the last couple weeks to catch up on some of the back episodes. So thank you, Melanie. Thank you for listening, and I'm glad you enjoy the EdTech thoughts here on the House of EdTech. That's all the news I have so far here. Any little announcements at the beginning of the show. So I'm really excited just to kind of get back into the swing of things. And I've been sitting on this conversation for a few weeks now. So let's get right into it. Here is my conversation with Tony Sinanis and Joe Sanfelippo. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, special guests for this episode include two guys I found on the street, Tony and Joe, but you may be more familiar with them as Tony Sinanis and Joe Sanfelippo. Tony is the reigning 2014 New York State Elementary School Principal of the Year. He is an all-around awesome leader in education. And his good friend in education, Joe Sanfelippo, he is the superintendent of the now world-famous Fall Creek School District. You may have heard the hashtag Go Crickets. If you haven't, I've said this before, get out of the rock you're living under. So they're laughing. We're going to have a good time. Let's get right into it with Tony and Joe. Welcome to the House of EdTech, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate the work, and hopefully we have a good time today.
We're going to keep it interesting for you, Chris.
That's right.
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard you guys. I've heard you guys on your own podcast, Brand Ed. I've heard you guys on other things, so I knew what I was getting into when I sent the invitation.
Yep.
Yeah, people say that, and then it happens, and then all of a sudden they get mad at us. So good luck with that, Chris.
Good luck is right.
No, it is all good here on the podcast. But why don't we start there with your podcast, the Brand Ed podcast on the BAM Radio Network. For people who haven't heard of that, talk a little bit about what it's about, and maybe because I like to geek out, how you guys put it together, and tell me about Brand Ed.
Well, I think it really kind of came out of a conversation that Tony and I had about I was headed to Ed Camp, New Jersey, and to visit some family out east, and he was going there too. So we thought about if there's an opportunity to kind of facilitate any session together, what would we do, or if he thought about it at all. And we were work around our area, and it was funny because we just got to talking about it and thought, man, how important it is, but why isn't it important for everybody else? And so if it's not important for everybody else, is there a way that we could kind of get into that venue and say, it is important because the vision that schools have and the opportunity that kids have to tell the story of what they're doing, if that's not out there, then there's a problem with that, because it's really honestly the best part of our day. So if we're eliminating that from the principal position or from the administrative position or the classroom position or whatever, where you get a chance to like share with the world the work of incredible kids, then we really have to reevaluate what we're doing, as a profession. So that's I guess that's more philosophical, that we got to talking and thought, let's get into it and let's do the session. And people seem to like it. And then we started doing some work with BAM Radio, and had a great opportunity there to bring some just wonderful people on that are doing the work in schools. And we try to just get out of the way, and we make fun of each other for about 30 seconds to a minute, and then we let them go, and it works pretty well.
Yeah, and we are very fortunate to work with Jeanette there at BAM Radio, who is an amazing producer, really does most of the work for us, because we just open up GarageBand, connect our microphone with our laptop, and we do our thing for about 12 minutes. And then she works some serious magic, because she puts it together and makes it sound like it makes sense and that it's like coherent. It's a wonderful thing. So that's the technical end of it as well.
Well, as a fan of the show and an avid subscriber, thank you for doing the show.
I'm glad. We were wondering who the guy was that was listening all the time. Now we know. Hey, Tony, it's Chris.
It's Chris. Now we will just speak to Chris from now on. It'll just be like, hey, Chris.
Yeah, Chris, we'll just call you from now on. That'll work out well. We can do whatever we want then.
There you go. Well, now I know what it means when you guys get on a show together, because I lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? Oh, so thank you for doing the podcast. And I forget which guest or if it came from both of you, but it was early on, within the first maybe 4 to 5 episodes, where the point was made how valuable it is for a school or a district to tell its story before, and I use this example with my own administration, tell the story before the newspaper shows up and tells a story you don't want told. So because of what I heard and learned on your show, I've now been able to kind of take that and bring that idea to other administrators that I've been in touch with. So I think that says a lot about where you want to go with the message of your school and your district. If you highlight the good, who cares about the bad? I mean, people care about the bad, but if there's a lot of good out there, that's a good thing.
But that's the only story that's getting told is the bad. I think the problem that we have in schools today is we're allowing people that went to school 5, 10, 15 years ago to tell the story of the kids that are going there now. And that's just simply not true. It's not fair. And our kids are doing some really astounding things. But if someone had a bad experience in school 15 years ago with a teacher that they didn't like, or an administrator that they didn't like, or a peer that they didn't like, and they're downtown telling that story, that's the one that we're allowing to rule the perception of our school. And that's just not the way it works. So we want to make sure that if we're out there highlighting stuff and we're talking to people about how important it is that that we take control of that message, then I think that kind of refutes some of the misinformation that's happening. And we're not talking about like telling false stories. We're talking about telling the real story. And that's even because the real story is awesome and kids are awesome. And the things that they're doing are awesome. And I'm sorry that if you had a bad experience in school 15 years ago, I'm sorry about that, but I can't help you right now. But I can provide an opportunity for my second grader and my third graders and my fifth graders or whoever to share what they're doing with the world, so they know it's bigger than their classroom. They know that it's bigger than the people in their room. They know that it's bigger than just the school. It's their whole community.
Now, because oh, no, go ahead, Tony. I'm sorry.
No. I was just to say, we know, and Joe touched on it, the landscape of public education is, at least the narrative is a negative one right now when you look at the local papers and the local news. And so this is an opportunity to spotlight the positive. And like Joe said, not make it up, because it's not made up. It's what's happening. It's what kids are doing. It's what teachers are doing. It's what communities are doing. So putting that out in the forefront really needs to be a focal point for us.
Now, when you guys are doing that focal point and you're talking to other teachers and leaders about how to do this, and again, I base this on the fact that we're on the House of EdTech, so we're not printing out flyers and mailing them with our, forever stamps to the community. What are some of the tools that you guys employ, besides obvious ones like your district website and Twitter, to really put the stories out there? How are you guys branding your districts?
So I'll start, and then Tony can get into some of the really cool stuff he's doing via video, which I think is amazing, and he should definitely be complimented on that. But we use our social media stance is that we want to make sure that we use a number of tools. We started out by trying to get really good at a couple, and I think sometimes it can be overwhelming. So we tried to get really good at utilizing Twitter and Facebook right away, because that's where our audience was, and more on Facebook than they were on Twitter. So it was important for us to make sure that we lived in that spot. So that was good. The second thing was to make sure that we kind of cross-pollinated that group by, where are other people, so we can kind of connect with them. So we utilize, Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and Flickr, and we stream those in our school as well. So anything that happens in those areas, we have these big 50-inch TVs across the school. Like, I think we have 7 of them, and they stream what's going on throughout the course of the day, so everybody can see what's going on and sharing the learning. But the thing that's connected us that's been really fun is kind of just taking a chapter out of what we're doing here and utilizing a podcast to highlight things that our kids are doing. So we have kids come on the podcast and talk about their experience, and you have to make sure that if you're doing that, it's not just the great stories that, of the valedictorian or the captain on the football team or whatever. It's got to be kids who struggle too. We had a young man who came on and told a story about how he just had a really hard time for 3 years and spent a lot of time in an office, and it's kind of clicking for him as a junior in high school right now. And that was one of my favorite episodes, because you could tell a kid's journey, and it doesn't always have to be like, a perfect, scale going up. There's going to be a lot of pitfalls in it.
Joe, real quick, what is the name of your district's podcast? Because I don't know it off the top of my head.
It's the go figure. It's the Go Crickets podcast. So yeah.
Very creative and original.
It is original, Sinanis.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, it's all about branding. All about the branding.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, there is a hashtag Sinanis.
Fortunately, because I have the opportunity to not only work with Joe but learn from Joe, much of the work that he mentioned that is unfolding in Fall Creek is definitely something I tried to replicate here at Kennyag. With features like Instagram, which I embraced this year because of Joe, and I created a professional Facebook account. We don't have a Facebook page. Our district is not at that point yet, but we're working towards that. But the thing that we've done a little bit differently here is our weekly newsletters that are video updates. And so each week we have a group of kids from a class come down. They meet with me on Monday morning, and we talk about, you guys are going to find out what's going on in the school. So it's kind of like a curriculum update, but a school-wide curriculum update, what's going on in kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth grade. And they come together on Wednesday afternoon during lunch. We eat lunch together, and then we record the video. And so that's great. We use TouchCast. It's a free app. I use my mini iPad. I record it for them. Sometimes a student will record. They'll be like a director or producer of the piece. They really decide what goes in it. We then take it from TouchCast, links to YouTube, and we upload it to our YouTube channel, which is then open to the community to see, and I email that out once a week as well. So that's really given us a space to share information that's not only important to parents, but it's relevant, timely, current, and somewhat dynamic in nature because it involves the kids really kind of guiding that story.
Tony, is the YouTube channel and the videos you create, are they completely public on YouTube?
They are, yeah. Mm-hmm. We've had conversations about, privacy and security and whatever. And what we know is that, people are not lurking on YouTube or Twitter to find a kid. That's what, people that are familiar to a child do, right? That's where, I went as far as to contact the FBI to find out where do predators typically lurk? Where would I have to worry about a group of elementary kids? Social media is not a space for that. YouTube is not really a space for that. I'm very conscious of the things that we say on video, though. I don't let kids say their last name. We're never like, and we're going to be at, 29 Main Street on Thursday at 6 p.m. Like, we don't delineate that kind of information. And so we do try to keep it general enough to not specify a child, because even with those fears being allayed by the people that I've spoken to, it does kind of sit in my head. And I'm a dad, and I think about, what Paul puts out there. Paul has 2 YouTube channels and shares a lot. And so just kind of looking at it from both lenses as well.
Well, then the reason I asked that is hopefully maybe by email you can send me the link, and I think that would be a great example for other districts and schools to check out and see how you're doing it. So I will hope to include that in the show notes for this episode.
Can I put it in the chat box next to this thing, or no?
You sure can.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to try to do that. Let's see,
so while Tony's doing that,
Chris is done. He's done then for the day. That's going to take him forever. So I mean. I hope you enjoyed his part of the podcast.
So while Tony's doing that, and through the magic of editing, people may or may not know that that's happening. You guys are also not later in the summer, but early in the fall, you guys are going to be the co-hosts of this year's BAMI Awards. And I'm going to give you this big open-ended, Joe. What can people expect when you guys take the stage?
Oh, man, I got to tell you, I think that BAM Radio is really rethinking that decision. I don't know if that was the best decision that they've ever made in the world, but we're going to try to figure it out as we move along, because I don't know what to expect, and I think that's part of the reason why they asked us, is that it's really, we're just trying to do what we can and try to get the word out there and get a little crazy, but also be respectful of the space and that kind of thing. So I wouldn't expect fireworks, but at the same time, we get out and we joke around. We have a good time. We don't script a lot of anything. In fact, I can't think of something that we have scripted before in the past. So I think that people should just expect us to be out there laughing, having a good time. And really, most importantly, just like we try to do on the show, most importantly is to highlight the work that other people are doing, and the work that's being done across the country with educators across the country is just astounding. So it's important for us to understand that if we can highlight what's going on in that space during the BAMIs, then let's make sure that we do that.
I mean this in the most highest complimentary state I can. When I heard that you guys were going to be hosting it, I immediately thought, oh my God, they just booked the Abbott and Costello of education.
I take it as a compliment, honestly, Chris. We have a good time, man. We just we try to joke around and we don't take each other too seriously, but we take the work seriously. And I think that if you do that, if you take the craft seriously, if you know that it's about kids and you can get into some of these venues to talk about the great work that kids are doing by being a little bit silly and not taking yourself too seriously, then, we're 100% all, on top of it.
I am going to reframe that for you a little bit, though, Chris. Instead of Abbott and Costello, I'm gonna say that we're more like the Jimmy Fallon and Stephen Colbert.
Those two? Are you kidding me?
I'm saying I'm clearly Jimmy Fallon.
Do you realize how talented those two guys are?
Yes.
And you're going to put us in that game? What are you? Are you out of your mind?
That and they had no one else who's willing to host.
True,
so between that and whatever.
It's more the second than the first.
You know what it is, and I will say this, Chris, because this is something that Joe and I talk about, and sometimes even get pushback online. Bottom line is, all the work, the majority of the work that Joe and I do, is genuinely from the heart about kids. It does not matter to me that I'm the lead learner here. I could be the head custodian here. I could be the guy who happens to be walking, around the corner here. It is all about the kids. And I know Joe runs it the same way. Like, you would never know when you talk to Joe that he's the superintendent of schools, because he talks about each and every one of his kids as if he were the kindergarten teacher or the middle school principal, and that really is the focal point. So when we talk about branding, right, and because we get pushback sometimes, it's kind of like, well, is this really about you or is it about your kids? It is 150% about our kids. And I'll tell you, when we go and we talk to school districts or to leaders in other parts of the country, all we talk about is Fall Creek and Cantiag. And because that's where the magic happens. And we're just lucky to get to witness it. And so celebrating it beyond our spaces is not because we think Fall Creek is the best district in the world, although Joe does. Not because I think Cantiag is the best elementary school in the world, although I do, because there are a lot of other amazing elementary schools. Most elementary schools see a lot of the things that I share on Twitter, and they're happening in their schools. A lot of the districts in the United States are seeing the things that Joe sees as superintendent, and they recognize them. The problem is, most of those spaces are not celebrating it. Most of those spaces are not putting it out there for the world to see. And so we're letting the news media put the stories out there about the fact that we make too much money, or that we should be evaluated against test scores, or those negative narratives that exist. And yet we control all the positives. So it's not about our space, although it's 100% about our kids. And I think that's most important, that if anything people get from us when they hear us talk, or they watch us talk, or they follow our Twitter feeds, that is the focal point. And the brand starts with those kids, because they live it, they are it, and so.
And what we do is if we're not celebrating them, then what's our real job? I mean, without them, we have nothing. So we have nothing to talk about if we don't have 825 kids in Fall Creek that are doing crazy, awesome stuff. So we don't take each other very seriously, but we take the work exceptionally seriously. And that's the work of kids. The work of kids is so awesome if you think about the fact, and the work of teachers, the fact that you put 25 kids in a room, all with varying abilities and personalities and home lives, and then you expect that person to move the entire group forward. Are you kidding me? That's astounding in and of itself. There's not one person in the world that goes to a doctor and sits in a room with 25 other patients and lets them work on them at that level. It just doesn't happen. So I mean, the work of teachers is just astounding, and that's what we celebrate. And
we often will say, I wasn't even a quarter of the teacher that I see teaching in my space. I walk out of classrooms and I'm like, holy moly, that is amazing. I never even thought about that, and it makes me feel a lot worse about myself, but a lot more relieved about the fact that I'm not the one leading the lesson. But it is awesomeness that is unfolding, and it's not just in our schools, because we know that it exists across this country. Are there pockets of negativity? Are there pockets of failure? Heck yeah, but there are pockets of negativity in medicine. There are pockets of negativity in law. There are pockets of negativity in politics. Probably a lot of pockets, but they exist everywhere in every profession. And yet, for some reason, the narrative we allow to unfold in this country when it comes to education is not a positive one. And that, I'm not to say that we blame ourselves, but we have the power to change that narrative. So we can't sit passively by and be like, okay, well, we'll let the Daily News write this story, or we'll let the New York Times write this story, or we'll let Time Magazine put the rotten apple on the cover. We don't have to do that. They can do that if they want, but we have 100 other stories to counter that are so much more positive and reflective of the realities of what's going on in school. So
now, if I was going to make a word cloud out of the podcast so far, I think the biggest word would be celebrate. And another big word would be
internet.
Yeah, you're not caught in the pre-show, are you? When I was yelling at him, because then the words would be 4 letters and not appropriate for this place.
Yeah. and I think the other big word would be positivity. But we also mentioned, and it's come up in the last couple of minutes, how there is that negative side. There's resistance to what's happening with what you guys are doing. But now you guys are presenting. Tony, I'm sure you have like principal roundtables where you know other principals around you and administrators. And I'm sure, Joe, you get together with other superintendents. How do you guys have conversations with people and deal with the pushback that you get when they say, oh, what are you doing? Or I don't have time for Twitter, or I don't want to tell my story, or they're not going to put forth the effort. How do you guys combat that in those real world scenarios?
I think the first thing is that you just have to meet them where they're at. The problem with the connected community right now, honestly, is that if it's seen as the cool kids table, or it's seen as something that group does, then nobody jumps on it and they just sit back and watch it happen. So wherever people are, that's where you need to make sure that they move, and they move from that place. And George Kuros says often, everybody's A to B is different. So whatever your A is, that's fine as long as you get to B. So it's important for us to understand that when we sit down with people, we're not sitting down to pontificate. We're sitting down with them to say, what can we do to help you celebrate the work that's going on in your school? Because I know it's amazing. I've never stepped foot in your school, but a school by nature is amazing. So what can we do to help you celebrate it? The other thing that I do with the superintendent lens is that, to be brutally honest, being a superintendent from a political standpoint and being a board member from a political standpoint, not awesome jobs. Okay. They're not the best jobs in the world. Having said that, when it comes to conversations that you have with the public, instead of people saying, what is wrong with whatever, they start out by saying, hey, I saw on Facebook that, right? Or, hey, I saw on Twitter that, whatever. Now, they'll still follow up with the second question, okay, which is fine. But at the outset of a conversation, it's about the good thing that's happening, and you can combat that because of the social media that you gain. And I think the same thing from if you're a superintendent and you adhere to you serve at the will of the board, right? So my job here is predicated on 5 people determining whether or not I'm doing a good job in this space. If they don't know what I'm doing in this, nice, Tony. If they don't know what I'm doing in this space, then it's important to understand that they're going to make the judgment of that. In the absence of knowledge, people tend to make up their own, right? So if you're telling them what's going on, if you're out there and having that conversation, then you develop social capital when something goes wrong, which it will. I promise it will. So if you develop the social capital piece of it, you're in a better spot. So when we sit down and talk to superintendents, or when I sit down and talk specifically to superintendents, I just tell them something's going to go wrong. I promise you something will go wrong. When something goes wrong, how much social capital have you built up to combat whatever it is that just went wrong? And then that gives them some ownership of the process, because then they know it's about how they can move themselves forward and their district forward and their board forward, and still put food on the table because they're not getting, asked about why they're doing what they're doing.
And at the building level, it's pretty simple. What's our job? Our job as leaders of a school is to be in classrooms, is to be interacting with kids, is to be interacting with staff, is to be knowledgeable about what's going on. And so when people say they don't have time, so does that mean that you don't have time to leave your office? Because I know that's not true of most principals. They are around, right? Hopefully around. And that they are visiting classrooms. They are interacting with kids. They're watching lessons unfold because they want to be informed about what's going on. So while you're there and you're doing your work, snap a photo, tell a story, change the narrative, right? Because we can do that, and it's simple, and it takes 30 seconds to tweet. It takes 30 seconds to post on Instagram and then send it to Facebook and Twitter at the same time. It takes 5 minutes to create a video newsletter featuring kids. You have that time. You may have to shuffle things around. You may have to do your email in the morning or after school. You may have to, write that memo after school or before kids come. But it's such a better use of your time. And I think back to just a month ago when I was writing end of the year evaluations, I was so incredibly stressed. Mind you, I left until the last minute, which is my fault, but I was stressed. But when it came down to writing them, all I had to do was flick through my Twitter stream, All I had to do was flip through my Storifys, where I've storified every week in our social media presence. I can evaluate teachers just from those pictures. That is my work. I'm collecting data. I'm seeing what's happening in classrooms. And it's so much more robust and dynamic and meaningful than me just writing up an evaluation with a bunch of quotes from a rubric. I see what our kids are doing, what our teachers are doing. And so when people say they don't have the time, I don't think it's they don't have the time. They just need to reframe how they use the time, right? And that's our work too. When Joe and I talk to people, it's like, I'm not telling you to do more, just telling you to do it a little differently, because you're doing it already, Yeah.
And we talk a lot about changing the culture of schools 30 seconds at a time.
That's right.
So if you can get into a classroom, take a picture and send it out, it takes you 30 seconds and you can change the culture 30 seconds at a time. That's really important to understand too, because it's you are responsible for the culture of your building as the leader in that building. And to take that on is really an important component. And I think everybody has time. It's just like Tony said, it's just how are you prioritizing what you do on a regular basis and developing the social capital needed to move buildings forward.
Mm-hmm.
Now, something that doesn't take 30 seconds is the fact that you guys are co-authors. See what I did there?
Yeah.
That was good.
The House of EdTech. The subtitle is the ability to make transitions.
Segue.
Yes. You guys are the co-authors of The Power of Branding, Telling Your School Story, and Principal Professional Development, Leading Learning in a Digital Age, both from Corwin Press.
Yes.
I'm not going to keep you guys another 30 minutes to talk about the books in detail because you guys are authors. You want people to buy the books and read them and learn from them. What are just a couple of highlights that people can expect from those texts?
Well, first and foremost, Chris, we're still trying to remember the titles of both texts. So when we do mention them, we actually mention them correctly because we are our own worst salespeople. We're our own worst reps.
Yeah, we're awful.
We're not good. I will speak to the Principal PD book, and Joe can tell you a little bit about the branding book. But ultimately, what is common about both is that they're short, they're focused on a very specific topic, and they're practical. And so when it comes to the Principal PD book, what we know about principals, and not just principals, what we know about assistant principals, what we know about superintendents is for whatever reason, research shows that the learning stops or it gets stifled in some way. For every 5 quality PD opportunities for a teacher, there might be 1 for a leader. That's a problem. We need to take control of our learning because if we're going to lead a school, we're going to be ensuring that 21st century skills are unfolding in our classrooms, then our focal point needs to be our own learning in addition to the learning of the community, right? And so in the 21st century, you have access to platforms that can accelerate your learning, that can personalize your learning, and that can let you self-direct that path. Like you figure out what it is that you need to learn, what skill set do you need to enhance, and there are ways to make that happen. Whether it's Twitter, where you connect, with people, develop PLN, and that cannot be understated for anyone who's listening to this podcast who is not connected. There is so much value in those relationships that unfold in 140 characters or less because you've eliminated every barrier. SCS is not a barrier. Gender is not a barrier. Physical location is not a barrier. They are all flattened. They're gone. And so what we have are these virtual communities of practice where people virtually, and fluidly move from novice to expert. There's a whole lot I don't know, but I know who to reach out to when I need to find out what I don't know. If I have a question about something when it comes to, drones, I know I can reach out to Joe. I know I can reach out to Brad Gustafson. When I have a question about accelerating learning, I know I can reach out to George Kouros. When I want to know more about digital leadership, I'm going to tweet Eric Scheninger, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. When I want to get into lobbying, I'm going to reach out to Tom Murray because he's working in DC, whatever the case may be. We wouldn't have written books if we weren't connected. Joe and I would not have had access to Peter DeWitt, who believed in this thought that we had and connected us with Corwin. So these connections cannot be understated in terms of the power and the value. And all that is professional development. Not only is it professional development, but it's personal development. And we found that those two things are very much interconnected. And so that book talks about the notion of Twitter, PLN, using Voxer, using Google Plus communities, whatever the digital resource is. But it's taking the opportunity to learn and personalizing it and encouraging leaders, even though the title says principal, it really could be any educational leader, to take control of their own learning.
Now, real quick, before I let Joe talk about the power of branding, Tony, when you mention all the different people and those examples of who you can go to for X or for Y, what is the most common thing that people come to you for?
Chris, did Joe tell you to ask me that question?
No, that's original. It's right here in my notes.
Okay. So aside from hair product, no. No.
I didn't even see, Chris, I don't even need to talk about it anymore. It just comes out in the conversation.
It just comes up. I think the question that I get asked most about is probably related to branding and telling our school story, and spotlighting that. And it could be a very technical question, like how do you get permission from all the parents, or how do you feature all the kids, to a more technical question of, is it Twitter? Do people use an iPad, an iPhone? What do people use to tell those stories in your space? So that probably, at least for me, is the one area that I get the most questions about at this point.
And Joe, before you talk about the power of branding, what's something that most often people come to you in the connected world to know more about?
I would agree with it. I would agree with what Tony said. I think the branding piece has really taken off in terms of what people are interested in, but I think it's got a lot of bells and whistles to it. Honestly, people like the idea of Twitter. They like the idea of Instagram. They like the idea of trying to utilize some of these tools because they're new and exciting to them. So I think that's the question that I get asked the most is, how can we connect our school, and how can we make sure that we're celebrating what happens in our school? So,
and Joe's not going to say this, but the reality is, Chris, you need to know that every superintendent, at least connected ones, model themselves after Dr. Sanfelippo in terms of the work that they do or try to. So people also reach out to him about that. Like, how do you run a district and still do all the things that you do? And there's something to be said for that, because that is not easy work. So anyway. And I won't give him any more compliments. I'm done.
Thanks. I don't need that. But 5 Hour Energy actually sponsored both of our books, so it's
and Snickers
and Snickers bars. Yeah, whatever it takes, man. Whatever it takes. So, yeah. So it's interesting that Tony was talking about the principal professional development, because all he provided was his bio for that book,
so and the title.
It's good. So the power of the branding book is really, I think that is one of the most fun things I've ever done professionally, is to write that book with Tony. And it was important for us to kind of get our voice out in terms of what we were doing. But I had one of my friends actually proof the text when we were all done with it. And she was someone who I had worked with for a couple of years, and was connected to. And her comment after she got done reading it was, I didn't know where your comments ended and where Tony's started. They were both coming from the same perspective. So that was a really cool thing. And to be able to write a book with one of your best friends is a pretty cool deal. So, but in terms of the book in general, I think the thing that we get talked to the most about the book is the tips and tricks that end up at the end of each chapter, and how it's really an easy read, honestly, because we're not very smart. But at the same time, there's some really cool tricks and tips at the end of each chapter to kind of get you to get something implemented and in place really, really quickly without having it be too much work.
We've left you speechless.
No, I was engrossed in thought, so that usually makes for another good, I'm glad it's not live, edit point. Okay. Now, before I let you guys go, what are each of you excited about for the upcoming 15-16 school year?
Oh my gosh,
man! You want me to start? I can start.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go.
So I have two things that I'm just really cranked up about this year. First and foremost is being able to see kids on campus again, because that if you're looking for a smile, there's just a lot of dark hallways and stuff going on in the school right now. I can't wait to get all those voices headed back and really talking about what goes on. But just as importantly for me, from a leadership perspective, and so I guess we're both hitting both books, actually, now that I think about it, because you can tell the story of those great kids coming back. But the second thing is our professional development process for our teachers has been one of the most incredible things that I've been a part of in terms of trying to move people forward, because it's a practice or a process that was built by teachers for teachers. And we treat professional development in this district like people treat Genius Hour in classrooms. You pick a passion project that you want to get better at, and that's your professional development. We don't schedule a lot of district initiative, district in-service stuff. It's about you and your growth, because right now, because we have 825 kids, our sample size is so small. So if we're basing all of our data, our PD on data from test scores, what happens is we get a couple kids move out and a couple kids move in. It vastly, moves our variable. And so the one variable, as Todd Whitaker says, the one variable that's the most important is the teacher. So how do we grow teachers? So when we take that process, we take the professional development process and give it to teachers and allow them to drive their instructional learning with their peers, demonstrate it how they want to, and be able to learn and grow on their time with their own process, man, that's the best, because it was built by the teacher. So we get these robust conversations about actual teaching and learning, and not logistical conversations about what checkbox do I make sure that I can put in so all my hours are taken care of by January, so I don't have to be professionally developed anymore, right? Mm-hmm. This is a process that's ongoing, and we're taking we're taking Campbell's work, the hero's journey, and we're utilizing that as like the framework for what we're doing. And I am totally jacked up to see how that works out. I got to thank John Carippo in California for the idea of utilizing the hero's journey, because it's a fantastic opportunity for us to really grow teachers and move and grow as an organization.
I'm just looking forward to the fact that I don't have to go to graduate school anymore. No.
And congratulations on receiving your doctorate earlier this year.
You realize what just happened, Chris, right?
No,
he said that only so you would congratulate him on his doctorate. It's ridiculous. It happens every time. It's like, hey, what are you getting for lunch? Well, I was going to go grab a sandwich, but I sure am glad that I'm done with my doctoral program.
Yes.
Well, I guess I'll have the fried bologna, and thanks, congratulations.
I had to go to Staples to buy special paper to print this thing out on. So that's why it's even in my hand right now. Anyway, so the two things that I am most excited about is that I'm going to continue to talk over Dr. Sanfelippo. Just because no one read your dissertation or even cares.
4 people read it. I even think they asked about it.
The 4 people on your committee. Anyway, so what I'm most excited about is our district. I do happen to work in an amazing district with an incredible superintendent who does have vision and foresight and is willing to take risks. So for the first time at the elementary level, our superintendent conference day, which is going to be October 28th this year, is going to be at camp style. So I'm really excited about that, and to very much like Joe was talking about, kind of give the teachers ownership over their PD and give them voice and choice. So that's going to be pretty exciting. I'm very much looking forward to that. And I think finally our makerspace is going to take shape as part of our library media center, which we redid this year thanks to a wonderful and generous donation from a parent. We were able to refurnish the library and kind of restructure the way things look there. So I'm really excited about that. But in all seriousness, and Joe said it in the beginning, I can't wait for our kids to be back. Like, I miss them so much. To be here at school is like, I mean, it's great. I'm getting work done. But I miss them, and I miss, those interactions and our staff as well, who are super excited to, get ready and come back. I'm already getting the emails like, when can I come set up my room? And, when are you going to be around? And I love that energy that builds in the month of August as we get ready to launch a new school year. So
actually, Tony, I'm a little surprised that, during the school year, you go around the building and you take pictures of the kids doing stuff. I'm surprised you're not running around the main office taking pictures of what your staff is doing during the summer.
Wait, you jest, Chris, but my head custodian, I was taking pictures one day last week, and he was like, let me tell you something right now. I'm going to take that phone and I am going to break it. So you could, in a minute, I'm going to be done. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll tell him, give me 1 minute. I have to be the principal. Anyway, no, it was not staged. And so
I can't do this anymore.
No. I don't even know what I was saying, Chris. It doesn't matter. The point is that
the custodian was going to break your phone.
He was going to break my phone. Wait, and that was one of my secretaries, and she was like, "No, because every time you take pictures and you put them on Twitter and Instagram, I look fat." I was like, "Okay, so I'm not allowed." And she's not fat, but in her mind, she thinks yes. So I'm not allowed to take pictures of anyone during the summer, and thus my feed is a little dry and boring at this point. But it is what it is.
All right, guys, thank you so much for coming here on to the House of EdTech. Before I let you go, real quick, and we'll go old school. We'll go top down. So we'll start with Joe. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you and find your stuff online?
There were so many ways I could have.
Yeah, that's right.
I won't.
You're going to take the high road, Tony. It's about time. I mean, you're 45 years old and you finally did it. So I think you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Joe Sanfelippo, JoeSanfelippofc on Twitter.
Good luck spelling that.
Yeah, right. You can also find me
try shortening that, man, so people can find you for real. I don't know. a handle that people can actually spell would be helpful. I'm just saying.
You are awesome. I love having you. Fantastic. Wow, isn't your internet down again?
If you're taking suggestions, you should be like you should be Dr. Crickets.
Yes.
Dr.
Crickets.
Right. I got to change the website. The website is jsanfelippo.com, but those are the two places that you'll be able to find me.
Yeah, don't find me anywhere. No, you can find me on Twitter at Tony Sinanis, TonySinanis. Instagram is the same thing, Tony Sinanis on there as well. And certainly emailing tsinanis@jerichoschools.org is definitely the best way to reach me, and I will respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
You'll see Tony's Twitter feed has a picture of his graduation day again. I mean, it's like let's relive that again, I guess.
Actually, if you really cared and you were truly a friend like you claim to be, if you were really a friend like you claim to be, you would know that my profile picture has changed.
Oh,
and
good.
it's a picture of my son and I.
Big morning for you.
My son, who thinks Joe is like the coolest guy ever, and I've had to shatter that dream. I'm like, Joe is not the coolest guy ever. He's a pain in the butt. Anyway, so yes, good times. Chris, what are you doing this summer? Are you getting ready to go back to work?
Yeah, luckily, here in Jersey, as an East Coast guy, I don't have to go back till September 1st or so. Okay. But like I told Joe when I got on here, I'm spending the summer now remodeling my kitchen, which I'm in the middle of.
That's a full-time job.
And we have the new baby on the way within the next 3 weeks. So very exciting.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Congratulations. You gonna name it Cricket?
Don't do that.
The name starts with a C, but that's about as much as I'm allowed to say right now.
Do I have any pull? I mean, can I have like a couple of meetings with the family, see if we can get that thing changed or what?
Hang up as fast as you can, Chris. Hang up. Otherwise, your kid's gonna come out not crying. It's gonna be like,
you're gonna need a Cricket onesie. I got Go Crickets onesies. You know that, right? I got Go Crickets onesies. We'll get you one.
Chris, wait, what district in New Jersey are you in?
I work in New Brunswick currently.
Oh yeah, okay, all
Right
right.
in Central Jersey.
That's great. Yeah, okay.
But I'm looking forward to Ed Camp, and maybe Joe, you come back out this fall for Ed Camp, New Jersey.
Yes, he should come out.
That's good. What a blast, and everybody doing Ed Camp, New Jersey in terms of like just the logistical running of it was phenomenal. You guys were just phenomenal.
All I do is go to it. All I did this year was buy the paper goods from Restaurant Depot.
That's awesome. Everybody did that, man. Every little bit helps.
Definitely does. Thank you, Chris, for this opportunity.
No, thank you guys. I understand it's the summer, and you guys are moving a mile a minute. So thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you.
No problem, Chris. Have a great day. Thanks for having us. I really appreciate it. Later, Tone. Have a good one.
Bye, Joe. Bye.
I hope you guys had as much fun listening to that conversation now as I did when I first had the conversation with Tony and Joe. They truly are, as the title of this episode says, what you see is what you get. So thank you guys for coming on to the show once again. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I look forward to talking to you guys in the future. Now, let's get to my EdTech thought. This episode's EdTech thought I am calling, Have a Great School Year. I just want to take this time to wish you nothing but success this coming school year. There will be challenges along the way, but just as you've done previously, you will meet those challenges head on, and you will come out successful on the other side. Don't sweat the small stuff. You are an effective educator. Don't forget that. Don't be afraid of observation time or standardized assessments. Invite your administrator in outside of observation time. Share the good things that are happening in your classroom. Teach your content the way you always do, and support your students to the best of your ability. And encourage your students to always try their best. That's all we can do. As you go on this journey from day 1 to day 180, remember that it is a marathon, and you need to pace yourself. Don't sprint out of the gate here in September. You want to be standing in June, right? Enjoy every moment with your students, but enjoy time with your family and friends that much more. Don't get bogged down. Don't be afraid to leave some work at school. Be sure to go home and enjoy time at home. Enjoy your weekends. Only bring work home if you absolutely have to. To close out this EdTech thought, best of luck this school year, and I'd like to borrow from the book of the great Angela Watson and her podcast, Truth for Teachers. To quote Angela, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it. I truly believe that, and I subscribe to that philosophy each and every day. That's my EdTech thought. And now for this episode's EdTech recommendation. I picked this little tip up from Richard Byrne over on freetechforteachers.com, and he recently shared a blog post called Easy Video Blog Entries on Blogger. So I'd like to share with you a few simple steps that if you use Blogger or your students use Blogger, here's how you can insert a video into your blog posts. Step 1, select the video icon in the post editor. Step 2, choose from your webcam, then grant Blogger access to your webcam. Finally, click record. Number 3, use the recording button to stop and start the video recording. Number 4, click select to insert your video into your blog post. Number 5, publish your post just like any other blog post. Now you can do this for solo blog entries where it's just going to be a video entry, or you could add video into text posts. I've actually done that in the show notes for this episode, so if you head over to chrisnessie.com and you view the show notes for this episode, number 44, there'll be a little video, just a few little bit of seconds, where I tried this out and put this video in the post. So check it out, and this is courtesy of, again, Richard Byrne over on Free Tech for Teachers, and I will link to the blog post where he's got some screenshots if just listening to me say the steps isn't helpful enough. He's got some screenshots. You can check that out, and you can start adding video to your blog entries today. And now it's time for this episode's House of EdTech VIP. Congratulations to Mr. Kevin Jarrett. Kevin Jarrett is a middle school STEAM teacher, design hack, aspiring maker, photographer, and burger junkie. Kevin is a lifelong learner interested in Minecraft, gamification, and, to simply put it, he wants to change the world. He is currently working at Northfield Community Middle School, where he gets to work with Glenn Robbins, the awesome forward-thinking principal. You can spot Kevin at just about any education conference in the New Jersey area. He's the one taking all the pictures and running cool sessions for the rest of us as well. Kevin is also an organizer of the very popular Chrome Camp, which is an unconference dedicated to all things Chrome and Google. You can get more information about Chrome Camp on their website, chromecamp.net, and there'll be a link to that in the show notes. As always, you need to connect with Kevin Jarrett. His username on Twitter is kjarrett, and that's KJARRETT. You can check out some of his photography on his Tumblr, which is kevinjarrett.tumblr.com, and he's also got a great photography portfolio on mrjarrett.viewbook.com. I'm going to link to all of that in the show notes, so connect with Kevin. And Kevin, congratulations. You are a House of EdTech VIP. And once again, another episode down. That's going to do it for this episode of House of EdTech. Brought to you in part, once again, by todaysmeet.com and helphub.me. Be sure to check out the links to both of those awesome services in the show notes, and it's a great way that if you support them, you're also supporting the House of EdTech. Keep the conversation going. Visit my website, chrisnessie.com. That's Nesi. Over on the website, you can review the show notes for this episode, and this is number 44. I would love your thoughts on the information and resources and the conversations shared in this episode. Leave a comment on the show notes, or you could email the show directly, and the address is feedback@chrisnessie.com. You can also submit audio feedback by calling the House of EdTech listener feedback line, and the phone number, as always, is 732-903-4869. And please connect with me on Voxer. I love Voxer. My username is Mr. Nessie, as is my Twitter name, Mr. Nessie, MRNESI. And if you connect on Twitter, just throw the hashtag House of EdTech into your tweets, and I'll be sure to see them. Now, if you enjoyed this episode of House of EdTech, and any other episodes you've listened to, Have you left a review and a rating in iTunes yet? You haven't? What are you waiting for? Please rate and review the podcast on iTunes. Your 5-star rating and honest positive review will help keep the House of EdTech front and center for others to discover and enjoy. You can also support the podcast through patreon.com. Just head over to patreon.com/houseofedtech. Patreon lets you show your support by pledging dollar amounts towards the podcast. Now, this show will always be free, but if you want to show your appreciation for the content I provide, and that support helps to offset the costs associated with the show that I currently incur. If you do, that's awesome. You can join the likes of Jeff Herb from Instructional Tech Talk, who is a patron of the show, and that'd be fantastic. If not, that's cool. I'm going to keep doing what I do, and it's going to be awesome because I love podcasting, and I can't wait to release the next episode. Speaking of the next episode, that's going to come out on September 27th, 2015, when I release episode number 45. And I'm going to be sharing my conversation with the Jennifer Williams. She's an organizer of EdCamp Tampa Bay, and that was a great conversation, and that's going to come at you again on September 27th, 2015. Once again, thank you for listening, and remember, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try.
And let's do this thing. If you eat gummy worms while we're on this thing, we're gonna have a real problem. I'll fly there and get you. See what happens? This is your own fault. If you don't eat the gummy worms, you don't choke on them.
I'm not choking. I'm sneezing. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Okay. Why did he go? Did he leave?
He did.
God, I'll get him back. It's ridiculous. You see what I deal with?
The House of EdTech is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. The Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more, go to edupodcastnetwork.com.